Good evening, everyone. It is 5:30, and I will call this policy committee meeting to order. Ms. Shope, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Spencer Anderson,
Present.
Amy Levy,
Here.
Greg Schneider.
Present.
All members are present, and Spencer Anderson is joining us virtually.
So moved.
Second.
Right, there is a motion and a second. I will open up discussion. I would like to make one adjustment. We'll refer to our to-do list created at our September 7th policy meeting throughout the discussion. I'd like to add review our 9/7 to-do list as agenda item 3E. So just to make sure that we do one run through of the list before we close to make sure we didn't miss anything. Does anyone object to that?
No.
All right. So Ms. Shope, if you could just note that in the minutes that we will add review our 9/7 to-do list as item 3E. All right, is there any other discussion on approval of the agenda? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Is there a motion to approve the September 7th policy minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All right, there is a motion and a second. I will open us up in discussion. Ms. Shope, under item 2, near the very bottom, the portion that begins, Levy stated the policies will be discussed. However, that should be no formal vote. And then if we go down to the end of that page where it says Tuesday, September 20th, regular, it should say board. And those are the only 2 edits that I had. Were there any other edits of the minutes from the 9/7 meeting?
No.
All right. Hearing none, all in favor of the acceptance, please say aye.
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 All right, that passes unanimously. So that brings us to 2A, public comment on athletic policy and rules. This is new for our committee, so there's some information that I do want to share for everyone. Committee meetings are conducted for the purpose of carrying out the business of the schools. The policy committee, as a representative body of the School District of Beloit Board of Education, wishes to provide this avenue to any individual to express their comments or concerns regarding the athletic policy and rules. Should individuals require translation assistance, a translator may be of the individual's choosing or one provided by the district. Public comments requiring translation will be given 6 minutes instead of the normal 3 minutes. Policy committee asks that individuals complete the public comment card and give those to our board secretary and approach the microphone when called upon after I read the norms for public comment. Those norms are: members of the public are welcome to attend all open meetings of the Board of Education. Robert's Rules of Order will be followed at all times. Individuals attending board members are expected to conduct themselves in a respectful and courteous manner that models appropriate behavior for our students. Individuals wishing to comment are expected to comply with the following norms in order to maintain a respectful and orderly meeting and to prevent discussion of confidential matters in a public forum. Comments must be directed to members of the Board of Education and not district employees, students, or other members of the public in attendance at the meeting. Speech that is belligerent, disorderly, disruptive, repetitive, or which exceeds the allowable time, which is 3 minutes, 6 minutes if you need translation, per minute for each speaker is prohibited. Concerns or questions that entail the disclosure of identifying information regarding students are prohibited. Responses from the board, if any, will be limited to clarifying inaccurate information, seeking additional information from the speaker, or acknowledging that the speaker has been understood. The board will not debate with an individual, and the committee may not take action on any item raised during public comment that is not on the meeting notice or agenda. The chair will interrupt and rule the individual who violates any of these norms out of order. If ruled out of order by the chair, the individual's opportunity to address the committee will end immediately and the microphone will be turned off. Thank you for your participation and courtesy. Is there anyone present who would like to make a public comment on the athletics and activities policy? Okay. Ms. Shope, it's my understanding that we do have one comment that was sent in. Would you go ahead? And I just want to note it is 5:35. We will hold public comment open until 6:35. But if no one comes in public or comes here to speak, we'll continue with the meeting, but we will pause immediately if someone comes that would like to address the committee.
I have an email that was sent in by Brian Deneau, who lives at 2503 Bootmaker Drive, Beloit, Wisconsin. He says, I am an extremely proud teacher, coach, and parent to 4 children in the school district of Beloit. Unfortunately, I cannot be there in person tonight as my youngest son had his soccer practice moved from Monday to Tuesday. He originally had his meeting dates mixed up, so that's why that sentence is there. I would like to talk briefly about the Athletic and Activities Code of Conduct for our district, namely the portion about academics. I appreciate all of the work that the policy committee put into the updated version of the code at the end of last year. I truly believe that those on the committee were doing what they thought was best for our students in Beloit. However, there are nuances to the code and how it applies to our students and athletic and activity programs that I believe could have been addressed differently and would have been better understood if teachers and coaches were involved in the early part of the process. I am hopeful that we can have a voice at the table going forward. There are 2 parts of the code that I feel are very important to address. The first part is the fall exception rule. Originally, this rule was instituted to support fall athletes who were ineligible when the code stated student athletes must miss a certain amount of school days. The fall sports started much earlier than the start of the school year, and student athletes would have to miss a huge amount of time if that exception rule was not made. The best decision, I believe, would be to simply follow the same rules that are implemented at the end of terms 2 and 3, where there is a set amount of days student athletes would be ineligible if they had 1 F and another amount of time if they had multiple Fs. The second part of the updated code that is currently on pause that I would like to see changed is the mandatory 2.0 rule from the previous term. As a teacher, coach, and parent, I want all of my athletes to push themselves in the classroom. I am afraid that a mandatory 2.0 rule would discourage students from taking challenging courses that they may not get a great grade in. The class I learned the most from in college was a course that I received a D. It made me work and think more than I ever had. I struggled, but I learned so much from that struggle. We live in a community where so much is required from our students. Obligations at home and work have only increased since the COVID pandemic. Allowing students to be part of a team or club while passing all of their classes and staying on pace to graduate is extremely important. It gives our students additional mentors in their lives and helps them develop much-needed social and emotional skills that will transfer as they become adults in society. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my thoughts this evening. I look forward to working together to make this school district even greater in the future. Brian Deneau.
Thank you, Ms. Shope. And just to clarify, there are no other emails that were submitted? Okay, all right. So the committee just wants to thank Coach Deneau for his perspective and taking the time to share his thoughts. Much appreciated. All right, so the way I have the items laid out that I think will be efficient and will incorporate the to-do list that we created while going through policy. So I just want to map it out and then we'll get started. Items 2, 3, and 5 from our to-do list, we'll actually discuss those next right before we go into policy 377. 377 Rule 1, there were no items in our to-do list that corresponded to that rule. And then before we review, or as we review policy 377 Rule 2, we'll cover items 6, 7, 15, and 16A on our to-do list, and then we'll finish up with Policy 377, Rule 3. So just to recap, hopefully committee members had a chance to review the to-do list. The items that I highlighted that I don't believe there may be some issues still remaining, again, was item 2, 3, and 5. And then items 6, 7, 15, and 16A. So I'll pause. Is there anything other than what I just listed on our 9-7 to-do list that committee members feel have not been addressed? All right, so those are the ones we'll move forward with. So again, before we jump into Policy 377, we will review items from our to-do list, and again, those are 2, 3, and 5. 2, the athletic and activities handbooks. Thank you for putting those drafts, much appreciated. I just want to confirm, and Michelle, you may know the answer to this. Those handbooks are not approved by the board, correct? The board just reviews them and they're cross-listed.
Correct. In the
Okay.
past, what would happen is 377 Rule 2 would be taken and like inserted into a handbook for the students, and modified just enough with like beginning and ending information that the athletic director needed to put in there and make it like an actual handbook. But the essence of Policy 377.2 made that handbook. And then there were also things from 377 Rule 2 that created the coach's handbook.
Okay.
So that's how those handbooks were done for as long as I can remember, because there was a time when we had an athletic director who was updating the handbooks, but not telling us over here so that we could take it to the policy committee. So we had to make sure they knew that it had to go in reverse order.
Got it. So if the committee agrees, what I would like to do is, again, thank you so much for creating that draft. It looks really substantial. If committee members have questions or concerns with the draft, if you could just email those to Dr. Anderson, and he will work with our athletics and activities director to get those responded to. But I do have a question. The note on the to-do list says drafts are attached throughout the year, ... would like to implement in 23-24. Was there something that should have been included after drafts will be attached throughout the year?
These are the first stages. I need to review them and go through them with a fine-tooth comb and add things and subtract things with administration, with my secretary, and with my coaching staff to make sure that they're all on the same page. If that makes sense, and then when I give that timeline of implementing in the fall of 23-24, I can go there.
Thank you, Ms. Shope.
Well, maybe I can't.
Can you turn the mic on, please?
No. That's all right. It's on. Is it on? The red button up top. Well, perfect. There we go. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so those are initial drafts. I need some time to work through them to make sure that we have everything implemented in there that we want for not only our coaches, but our parents and guardians and those types of things, because we would like to attach that then to registration. So they would have to sign off on that, not just the policy per se when it comes to it. So just more in-depth information and work to be done on them.
Okay, I just got a little thrown off when it said it'll be attached throughout the year. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you want to kind of live with it for the rest of this school year in the summer and then work out all the kinks. And then we would be able to cross-list a final copy at the start of the of next school year. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty much, yep.
Perfect. So here's the thing. Some of us will be here, some of us may not. So you will be here as athletic and activities director. So if you could just remember to work with the board to make sure once it's finalized, since it doesn't need board approval, that it does get cross-listed so we can have that linked into the policy, because I think that's really going to be important. All right, and then number 3, Dr. Anderson, I know you have lots of things going on. Create administrative regs for the policy. Is there a plan to kind of notify in the handoff to the next superintendent, like these regs need to be created? What is the plan for that?
All right. No, normally when I think of regulations as far as policies, those are your rules, and you already have 3. So my thought is as we go through this, we'll make modifications to the rules if necessary that correspond with the policy. So they kind of go hand in hand. So if we make changes on the policy, then it will cause some change in the rules. So depending on that, I'll update. And if we do have a handoff, I'll simply make sure that the new superintendent knows where we left off and what still needs to be done. But hopefully, during the next month, that will be taken care of unless there's something happens.
Yeah, and it's my understanding that the rules tell you the what needs to be done, and then the regs tell you logistically how to do that. So the way we've talked about treating regulations, administrative regs in the district, they're housed in board docs. Unfortunately, we only have one, but it's the how to do the what that's outlined in the rules, if that makes sense. And I think we can I have an example once we get to it in the policy, but yeah, if that's one of the things that you could just highlight in the handoff under athletics and activities, that would be appreciated. All right, and then number 5, Ms. Shope, I believe this happened, but I just wanted to confirm. You unretired the previous version of policy 377 and rules 1 through 3 while we're looking at this, correct?
Well, I unretired 377 and rules 1
1
and
and
2.
2, because 3 didn't exist.
And then
Okay.
3, I moved into the draft section again, along with the approved version from June, which is what we're working off of tonight.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, so we are ready to head to policy 377. We'll handle this as we normally do. Since it's just a little over a page, we won't go page by page, but the policy in its entirety. Board Member Schneider, do you have any questions or concerns with policy 377?
I do not.
Okay. Board Member Anderson, same question.
I do not.
All right. I have a couple small items. Under limits to participation, that first sentence that's going to be added is students shall not be limited from participation in practices, rehearsals, or meetings during the period of suspension. Could we get rid of that next bullet point by just saying unless that limitation occurs under a separate policy? That just seems cleaner to me than what's there for co-curricular activities on which academic grades are assessed may not be limited under this policy, but may be addressed under another district policy. Feedback on that from committee members, please.
I think that sounds better.
Okay. Board Member Anderson, are you okay with that adjustment?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, so Ms. Shope, again, that last sentence, the new one in green, students shall be, and then just at the end of that, during the period of suspension, unless that limitation occurs under a separate policy. So adding that will allow us to remove that first bullet point. And then I have a question with the second bullet point. Advisors, club leaders, et cetera, may have rules above and beyond what is provided as a minimum under the activity code of conduct. Mr. Dupuy, do you have a running list of additional requirements that athletics or activities may have that's beyond the scope of the policy?
I think that's what we're creating, right, within these books. But maybe I'm not understanding the question.
So I have an example. So for concert and jazz band, and I know this as a parent, the permission slip kind of requirements that we receive before our kiddos could start, you have to have a 2.0. So right now, that was in our policy that was finalized by the full board in June, but it's been suspended while we work on this. So that is not current policy. But if you participate at the intermediate level in jazz or concert band, you have to have a 2.0. So those are the type of additional requirements that are outside of the scope of this policy, because there is this clause that says advisors, club leaders, et cetera, may have rules above and beyond what is provided as a minimum under the activity code of conduct. So that's this policy. Does that make sense now?
Yeah, I do not have a list from every advisor. I met with them a few weeks ago, and I can reach out though to see. I know that there are some athletic teams that when they go over kind of rules and things like that at their player parent meeting, preseason meeting, right? They have expectations, for their team members and things like that might go above and beyond. So I could reach out if that's what you would like me to do.
Yeah, and what I'm
Yep.
thinking, so I had two questions. One, are you comfortable with that clause remaining in the policy? i.e., are you comfortable with co-curriculars having requirements above and beyond what's listed in the current policy? And if yes, do you want that to be something that has to be approved by you? Because in that way, when you do the approval, you can put it in a running list, just so if you ever have a question, you're not blindsided by that. You know what the requirements are beyond the scope of the policy for each of our co-curriculars.
I think it's first important to outline what activities and clubs are going to fall under that list, right? Who, we talked about those that are competing, are participating in events outside the district. For example, FBLA or DECA, do they fall under that clause where maybe the anime club, that's just the in-house club, they don't necessarily fall under that requirement. Activities and clubs right now is a gray area that we need to have to figure out. Their rosters are flux. It's not like they can register at the beginning of the year for some of these and they're involved in it throughout. Some don't have regular meetings throughout, or they have maybe meetings in the winter, but not the fall and the spring. So how are we holding them accountable to our code book? So that needs to be figured out, I think, before this. I think I would be okay with having this clause in there, and then having that advisor or leader meet with me prior to their season per se, and review that document before they push it out.
So Dr. Anderson, I'll get to you in just a minute. You lost me with the start. So it's my understanding, any athletic or activity that happens in the school district of Beloit is under your purview as the athletic and activities director. That's accurate?
Correct.
Okay. So I wasn't sure what you were saying in the beginning, is we'll have to see which ones fall under this policy. It's all of them.
So we're saying that anime club that doesn't compete or participate outside at events is going to have to register and have grade checks and those types of things.
It's an activity.
Okay, I just need clarification on that, because this is not what we've maybe talked about per se amongst people, or nor was I privy to that, because again, not everybody, how do we create a up-to-date roster for all these clubs and activities that start? I've had 3 requests. How do we start a club? So those types of things are things that I think we need to work out. If maybe I'm not accurately explaining that.
No, I was able to follow you, and the title of the policy is Interscholastic Athletic and Activities. So any athletic, any activity that happens in the school district of Beloit fall under this policy. Dr. Anderson?
Right, I was just going to go along with what Mr. Dupre. I think the the key is what is an activity? In other words, if we have a Spanish club or a French club, is a club an activity?
It
And I
is.
think, and I think that's the definition that has to be made clear. I will tell you in my past lives, even as an AD and principal, is that those types of clubs never fell under activities. So I think it's important that we define what it is so that everybody is clear as we go across, because as I said, the definition I think is going to be important, so everyone knows what it means, because for some, like, I'll just use like a Spanish club, they may do most of their activities either, just outside after school, if they're in Spanish class, they may be in Spanish club, they may end up looking at whether or not they go to go out to eat at a Hispanic restaurant is one of their activities. I think it's where's the line so that we know, who would fall under whatever policy we finalize. Does it take them out of participation or not? Because I don't think there'd be universal agreement, at least at this time, among, if we looked at the high school and the intermediate staff of, what people would consider an activity in the school and what wouldn't be. And I think that's what John's trying to get at. And I think that's an important point going forward is what are activities. And I think probably we should list at least the ones that we know of so people know that they do fall under this policy.
So I think what would be helpful, so on our to-do list, 7B is find the policy that looks at board-approved activities. And Ms. Shope, I believe at the end of our last meeting, you drew our attention to that policy. I'm hopeful that you still have that policy number. Could you give that to us, please?
Yes, I added it to one of the policies, so let me just
Okay.
find it quick.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So the tricky part is, right, is if somebody does get a code violation, and let's say Spanish club, but Spanish club, they're just meeting, right? How do we hold that person accountable where in a sport, right, it's easy, 1 week of competition or 25% or those types of things, but this is that line I think that Dr. Anderson and myself are kind of talking about. If you don't have a club that participates or competes in events, how are you then following if they do get a violation? What is the I don't know the correct word. I don't want to say punishment, but what is the consequence, right? Yeah.
So here's the thing. I'm just going to go ahead and address, for me, what the elephant in the room is. A lot of this work, and when I say a lot, 6 months of this work was done with a different superintendent and with a different athletic director. So I just want to acknowledge that maybe that's a lot for you to step into with your other responsibilities. But in that 6 months of work, there were discussions about that's what their input was for, to make sure that things were as universally fair as possible for our activities, for our athletics, et cetera. So let's pause and look at the policy and see what the lists are, because that may make this more clear. Ms. Shope, what was the policy number?
The policy is 434, and it's called Release Time for Students, and it's referring to board-approved activities that students are in that count as hours or class time.
Okay, so that goes back to the credits. Okay, so let me ask you this. Every year, there is a list of new activities that students want to form, and those are approved by the board. Do we have a running list of all current activities in the district?
Only when the board approves it, and you're only approving the ones that are attached to the 60 fund. There are other ones that go on in the district that don't have anything to do with money. And so we don't have that list centrally located because I think, as John was trying to say, there might be a Spanish club, but if they're not raising money Or there's like, I know my son belonged to a French club, and a lot of times they were just like watching like a French-made film and then analyzing it and, you know, things like that. So it wasn't an activity where they were raising money and going and doing other things. But there was a Latin club that Miss Polito used to do, and they would raise money and do other things, and then she would take the students with permission and all that stuff overseas in the summer.
So let me ask you this. If I am a student in a building and I want to start a club, who approves that club?
Typically, what I understand is if I'm the student and I want to start a club,
And I have an advisor.
I was going to say, the first
Yep.
thing I have to do is find an advisor.
Check.
So if you're going to be my advisor for the club that I want to do, and I've got 10 kids interested in doing it, then we have to get permission
From?
it should be from the building principal.
Okay, so this is what I would like to do. We need a composite list from building principals about what activities are in their building. And I want to hear from other committee members, but I'm operating under the impression that if you are an activity, which I consider a club to be an activity, that falls under this policy. Board Member Schneider, do you have a different understanding of that?
No, that is my understanding.
Okay. Board Member Anderson, do you have a different understanding of that?
No, I do not.
Okay. And again, I get that's a lot to keep track of, but the policy is for athletics and activities. So I think our next step, well, in conjunction to what we're doing with policy, is that we need a comprehensive list of all athletics and activities within our district. And it sounds like the building principals are each going to have a piece of that.
I think one thing that we can look at first that might help with that process is if the advisor or activities advisor is a paid position, then there probably is going to be a more likelihood that it would fit under this policy if they have paid advisors. That might at least be a place to start.
But even if it's an advisor that volunteers, if we have students that are engaging in activities, I think they should all know what the expectations are. So whether if you have an advisor, you are participating in an activity. And we just need to capture what all of those activities are, and then add that to our list of athletics, and then we'll know what we're working with. So if we are creating a 10-5 to-do list, Dr. Anderson, could you work with our athletics and activities director to give us a comprehensive list of our athletics and activities throughout the district, please? All
I
right.
have that note to do that now.
Thank you so much, sir. And Michelle, will you please do the same to have because I'm saying it, but if you keep me together, please. So Mr. Dupuis, I think it would make sense if you are fine with that clause remaining, that you approve those, because I wouldn't want requirements to be out there that you're not aware of. And it seems to me the easiest way to make sure you're aware of it is if you have signed off on it. And if you object to it, then that's something you and the advisor or you and the coach can kind of come to resolution on. And then again, you'll have that information. Does that work for you?
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay. So Ms. Shope, if we could just adjust that second bullet point. It seems like we're fine with that, and just have a second sentence on that is all additional rules above and beyond, well, I don't want to be too repetitive. All additional rules must be approved by the athletic and activities director. Okay, thank you so much. All right, last call from any committee member or if anyone present has a question on policy 377. All right, we're going to move on to policy 377, Rule 1. Board Member Schneider, do you have any, it's just 2 pages, so we'll look at it in its entirety. Do you have any questions or concerns with Policy 377, Rule 1?
I do not.
Okay. Or Committee Member Anderson, same question.
I do not.
Okay. I just have one clarification. It's under 5 contracts B towards the last sentence, entry fees and any other financial arrangement shall be shown on the game/competition/performance contract. How does that logistically work? And the context behind this is the discussion we've had around cross-country. So any entry fees, we would know about those how, and then who's responsible for making sure that we either request an invoice and let them know we'll pay once we get the invoice. How does that work currently?
Currently, for most cases, everything is worked through our school, and they send a contract. And if there's a fee on that contract, we know that that's what we have to pay to get into that event. There's some schools that we participate against in intermediate or in Illinois that don't use our school, so then they do send a paper contract to us. The case that you're talking about,
And we don't have to go into the
okay,
specific.
yep.
Yeah, I just
So,
wanted to know how
yep.
the process
And then,
works.
so once we get that contract, my athletic secretary fills those out weekly, turns them in, they're approved by me. My understanding, it goes to COLAC, and then they process the check and send it out.
Okay, so if there's an instance where it's a per participant fee, we wouldn't know until, do we have to send a roster ahead of time? These are the number of students that are participating, or can you do, like, get the invoice after the event and just communicate that ahead of time? So everyone's clear that payment's gonna happen and this is how it's gonna happen.
Yes, there are some sporting events that you have to upload participants prior. However, then on the day of the race, they check them off and then they send a bill afterwards or an invoice afterwards for most cases.
Does it make sense to outline what you just described? So right now it said entry fees and other financial arrangements shall be shown on the game, competition, performance contract. It seems like that, that is what happens. But the note that I have is who's responsible for making sure that those are paid. So would you like to include that those contracts are reviewed and approved by the athletic and activities director, and then the invoice is sent to the business department at COLAC for final payment? And Attorney Baran, feel free to join in. Does it make sense to have that level of specificity so people know how the process works? Or that could be an administrative regulation for this policy. So this is the what, and then that process of, like, you approve it, you send it to CAC, someone in the business office cuts the check and sends that out. I think, yes, go ahead, Ms. Shope.
You didn't have to stop in mid-speech.
No, well, I saw your hand, so
No.
we're good.
So I was going to speak from parental experience
Please.
as a band booster and the band booster president. I was going to say, no, don't be specific in the policy, because quite often, like the jazz band or even the big concert bands and such, entry fees a lot of times were paid by the money that the booster club raised. So they wouldn't be processed through the athletic and activities director and the COLAC center, because they're being filled out for like an extended field trip and approved that way through the high school principal and the COLAC Education Center. But the entry fee for the competition is being paid by the jazz band booster club or the booster club for the high school band, which is all one in the same booster club.
So let me ask this, since policy currently states, it lists the entry fees, why would some entry fees be paid by the district and other entry fees be paid by booster clubs. Is that fair to our students?
I don't, it's hard for me to speak what goes on here, but in the past, things that I'm used to is that it's not the booster club that pays for the entry fees into events that, like if we have a jazz band contest or if there's solo ensemble or those types of things, the district always ends up paying for those. It may not go at all through the activities director. It may go through the band director right to, the building principal into the business office to be paid. I think where booster clubs usually come in, at least in my experience, is that if there are experiences that the kids are going to take a trip to listen to a jazz band, in Chicago, the booster club may end up paying for the buses and that. It's not an entry fee, but it's
Right.
something, in my experience, all entry fees are always end up paying for by the district if it's a school-run club or event.
And I completely support that, and that makes, I see you shaking your head no, which I appreciate. Here's the thing. So this is a policy level decision, and I want to get feedback from the committee. Removing barriers to entry, it's my understanding, like, for example, we provide an instrument to any student in our district that wants to participate in band, orchestra, etc. So why would we leave it on the group to pay for an entry fee? I think that just as an equity issue and removing barriers for students to participate, that should be on the district. Do you have a different opinion, Mr. Dupuy?
No, I agree. I mean, entry fees should be paid for by the district above and beyond.
Right.
Should not, but, I don't know, this kind of goes back into, not going back, but again, what activities, do they have a Fund 21 account, or do they have accounts that they budget for on a yearly basis for these things? Like our jazz band goes to 3 competitions every year, so we build that into the budget. Our choir goes to, FBLA, those types of things. And I think then you can start building what groups fall under that, that kind of realm of the co-curricular handbook as well. I agree. We as a district should be paying entry fees for our activities and our athletics.
Right. Committee member Schneider, what is your position on that? Do you think that is something that the district should cover, or we should leave to fundraising from the club or activity?
I think that is something that should come through district.
Okay.
Or at least go through the business office, whether it's through the business office here or through the business office within the building, which would then allow them to use their activity funds that are there that they budgeted for to pay for that.
Okay. Committee member Anderson?
I'll agree with committee member Snyder.
Okay, so is everyone comfortable? And thank you for providing that perspective, Dr. Anderson. And I think there's a difference. If you want to go have an experience that's related to your athletic or activity, I think that makes sense to fundraise and to make that happen. But if it's a competition through your club or activity or athletics with the school, I think the district should cover the cost of that. So entry fees will be paid by the district. Okay, let me just figure out what wording, and feel free to unmute and jump in, committee members. The school district of Beloit will pay entry fees and any other financial School district of Beloit will pay entry fees for co-curricular activities, period. Entry fees and any other financial arrangements shall be shown on the game/competition/performance contract. And then if we also included the athletic and activities director or designee, will initiate the payment process to be finalized through the business office. So one, is that accurate of how we want that to happen?
Again, I think it's going to go to our definition, like what will fit under co-curriculars. And the example just came into my head is that some schools have a chess club. No, the chess club is not an official organization, but it's a group of individuals that get together to play chess, and sometimes they'll want to go and participate in a tournament that's being held. I know there's one in Stevens Point. That may be one where each participant, at least in my past experience, the participants that go pay to compete in this because it's not a school activity, it's not a co-curricular event, but it is a group of kids that may have an advisor and get together to play chess at school. So I think it's all it's how we end up defining what fits in this co-curricular list that we're going to work on.
So my position is any group that has an advisor, whether they are paid or volunteer, that's a district activity. Board Member Anderson or Schneider, please chime in if you see it differently.
I do not. I agree with that definition.
Okay. So Dr. Anderson, and I think it may be prudent for us to explicitly say that in the policy to kind of clear it up. It seems to me that at the beginning of probably policy 377, so if we can jump back to 377, so participation in interscholastic so it talks about that. I thought we changed that to participation in interscholastic athletics and activities enhances engagement. It doesn't seem like we did. So my apologies for not catching that while we were reviewing 377. Is everyone okay with that adjustment for that first sentence to read athletics and activities? Okay. Now, if we started with one sentence prior to that to read and not married to the verbiage, any activity in the school district of, okay, so let me just think out loud and then we'll make it sound appropriate. I think athletics are clear. Everyone's clear on what an athletic is. You have a coach, you have practice, et cetera. But any organized group within the district that has an advisor is considered a school district of Beloit activity. That's the spirit of what we want to say. Does anyone have beautiful language around that? Ms. Shope, could you repeat that first sentence back and we can see if that's acceptable? And again, this will be the opener for policy 377.
So I have any organized group within the school district of Beloit is considered an activity?
Okay, so any organized group with an advisor
Okay.
is considered, within the district, is considered an activity. So any organized group with an advisor.
I think we should probably specify paid and/or voluntary because that would clear it up. Now, I think that one of the things that if we have further discussion, I think one of the things that Mr. Dupre and I are going to have to work on is, getting a list of all of the activities that would fall underneath this, and I think that would be helpful going forward,
And then to have that cross-listed or cross-referenced.
so we could at least see, is this what we meant? Because there may be things on the list that say, I never really thought that. But Mr. Dupre and I will start putting that list together and get that out, because to be real honest, I can't even imagine how many different groups might fall under that definition.
Okay. Ms. Shope, could you read that sentence back, please?
Yes. Any organized group with an advisor, either paid or voluntary, within the school district of Beloit is considered an activity.
I think that's perfect. Do any committee members object to that?
No.
Attorney Brand, are we good?
Yes, I'm just processing if there's any necessary clarification to identify what makes it a district. I need district sponsored, approved by the district. If there's any clarification needed there, because you're getting into advisors that are paid or voluntary, if there's going to be a gray area, and maybe that's a question partially to administration. Is there ever a group that would be advised or have an advisor within the building that is not district sanctioned or approved by administration as part of the district per se?
Like I said, I can't speak for this district because I don't know yet, but I can tell you from past districts, that would not be uncommon. I mean, for a group of kids to have contacted an individual to be their advisor, to meet after school, to do, like mentioned chess, but I call it esports. I mean, it wouldn't be uncommon for an activity or a group to be meeting in school that would not be a board-approved activity.
So
Can we say
let's,
district approved or something? Would that, I mean, does that work to say district approved, however it came to be approved within the building or not?
so the only concern there is, if I'm understanding it correctly, the only activities that the board approves are activities that fundraise. But you could be an activity that doesn't fundraise and would not come before the board for approval. Is that accurate, Ms. Shope?
Right. That's what I understood as well. But are there groups that would be approved by administration within the buildings
I would
versus
think,
not approved?
let's put that on our to-do list, and then when Dr. Anderson and the team reach out to the principals to find out what activities are in their building, they would have, I can't imagine a principal including an unapproved activity on that list.
I agree with you. I just want to make sure the definition in policy is clear, right?
No,
That
I
we're-
appreciate that. So could we
Let's do
also
what-
put a note on our to-do list to circle back to Attorney Brand to make sure that our verbiage around approved activities is clear? Thank you.
Yes. I did also just see, excuse me, as I was relooking at 377, that in that limits to participation first paragraph, it says activities are defined as competitions, performances, field trips, assemblies, dances, and other activities in which the student participates. This includes but is not limited to homecoming parades, special ceremonies, school dances, etc. So it does sound like at some point somebody was trying to define what activities are.
And for me, that seems like an activity, like a verb, like you're doing something. But activities, the word is like a club. Does that difference make sense? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Dupuy.
Yeah, I just want the committee to be aware that unlike sports and maybe some of these activities as it's kind of defined here, there's not a start and stop to the season, and their rosters ebb and flow throughout the year. So for me or a designee to have the task of trying to track grades or have people register or those types of things, I'm not sure how that will be done, if that makes sense.
No, yes, it does. And what may need to happen is that is the role of the advisor. The advisor, and so maybe you come up with a system. So thank you so much for agreeing to serve as an advisor, and of your responsibilities, you got to keep track of your roster. You do the grade checks. Now, it may become tricky. Can you have an advisor that's not an employee? So that may be what we find. But first, I think we need to know, what are the activities? Do we have any activity advisors that are not employees? Because those may need to be handled differently. But I would think that 95+% of our advisors are district employees, and that may become part of the responsibility of serving as an advisor. And then they just need to, that you have access to that information. If you ever need to follow up or et cetera, there has to be a system where you have access to that. And I think it starts with having a comprehensive list of what activities do we have. But Ms. Shope, that's a good point. I don't want to confuse, because again, in the title, I'm thinking activity is like a club. But in this, it's like activity like a thing that you do.
Board Member Levy, can I just
Please,
ask a question?
absolutely.
I'm not sure if that definition of activities was intended to correspond to the scope of activities in the definition of the policy, or if that definition of activity was intended to define the penalty, if you will, for the code violations, because it seems as though that sentence that we added regarding exclusion of practices, rehearsals, meetings is the counterpart to the definition of activities in that previous sentence.
Right, and I would almost want to, I would want to change activities under limits of participation to a different word, just to keep it clear. And I'm just throwing
That's
this
what I
out. So, School District of Beloit in any event until all consequences are, but I'm not married to the word event. But if someone has another word that would eliminate that confusion, but be true to the spirit of the meaning of what's outlined. So for right now, we're using event. So in the event of a student violates the student code of conduct, a student will be suspended from representing the School District of Beloit in any event until all consequences are completed. Events are defined. Is anyone opposed to using event to eliminate that confusion? Or if you have a better word, something that makes more sense? Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Anderson.
What about the word competition? Because I think that's one that we could all understand is, if you're competing against one, because all athletics are competitions against some, so I think
But that won't
But
fit
the-
for activities is my only concern.
it fits some. I'm just trying to think of potential
Yeah.
words.
Because like for here under the list, it has homecoming parade, that's not a competition, a special ceremony, a dance. Board Member Schneider, were you gonna chime in?
I was just going to say that competition doesn't include all of the activities that we
Yeah.
have in the district.
Are we okay with event? Do you have a different suggestion? Any sponsored event until the consequences are completed, and then events are defined as? And Committee Member Anderson, feel free to jump in.
I think we would, in that definition, we would have to include athletics, activities, and clubs. I mean, because it's limits to participation, so it's not just in sponsored events. So activities are defined as,
Could we use the words clubs and organizations? I mean, and I'm just thinking as we progress on the other parts of the rules, it's like the homecoming parade's coming up. Well, lots of people are, let's say that the current rule of the GPA was on for 2.0. It's not realistic to think that we would go and check to find out if every individual participating in the parade,
Absolutely.
that
Yep.
wouldn't be realistic.
Okay, so you would like for it to read, representing the School District of Beloit in any, you said club or?
Organization. I think my senior moments are happening.
No, you are fine.
When you have two different, as you stated earlier, you have activities as being a noun and you have it being a verb. And I think the verbiage part, the dances, the homecoming parades, those are things that I do not think were ever meant to fall under these type of policies. But I do think the clubs and organizations, maybe that was the original intent.
But I think that takes us back to activities. Like a club and organization, I think is likened to an activity, and that's what we're trying to avoid because it's not the same as like activities as it is expressed in the title. So I would actually prefer event over that. So it would be representing the school district of Beloit in any event until the consequences are completed. And this, so for example, so this is speaking to violates the school code of conduct. So I'm assuming you can't participate in the parade, or for example, if there's a dance, you can't have so many tardies or unexcused absences, etc. Those would be the consequence that would prevent you from participating in the event. And I get on a big scale like the homecoming parade, it's hard to monitor that, but I think the spirit of is there certain events that you can't participate in if you violated the student code of conduct. Does that make sense?
Well, being an AP for 9 years, one of the things that first comes to mind are dances, which are an
Yeah.
activity. But every student was always allowed to go to a dance unless they had been suspended from school. That was the only thing. There was no other criteria if they came to one of those activities, because lots of them weren't in any what we would have called athletics or clubs. But this is an activity, and there are no checks when we have those type of things. I would almost be certain that they don't check here when they have a dance. A homecoming dance is coming up. Everybody's allowed to come unless for some reason they're not allowed on school ground, which would be suspension.
Right, and that suspension would be a violation of the student code of conduct, right? Which is separate from this policy. So again, for me, it's more accurate to the spirit of what's being said to list it as an event, because if we call it an activity, we're running into that confusion with the title. Board members Schneider and Anderson, are you okay with event?
The only concern I would have with using event is practice for athletics could be considered an event. And yet there are some points where, well, I guess it's
No, that's
code
a
of
good
conduct,
point.
yeah.
So what if
So-
we said any event not outlined explicitly in this policy? Because limits to participation talk about that doesn't include practice or that doesn't include rehearsals. So no, I think that's a good point for clarity. So any event not specifically outlined in this policy. Would that clear that up for you?
Yes.
Okay. Board Member Anderson, does that sound okay for you?
Yeah, I think having that clarification there is going to be the big part of it.
Okay, so Ms. Shope, we would adjust that. So that first sentence under limits of participation, that the second line, school district of Beloit in any events not specifically outlined in this policy, and then events are defined as. And then I like that this includes but is not limited to. So we acknowledge this isn't an exhaustive list, but just to give people an understanding of examples that we mean. All right, Ms. Shope, do you need anything repeated under limits of participation?
No, I think I'm good with that. However, grammatically,
Yep.
the very beginning of limits to participation starts with like the clause in the event that a student, and now you're using the word event to mean something completely different in the sentence.
Yeah, but sometimes words do that. They have more than one. I think we're okay. Like in the event, I think we're good.
Okay.
Attorney Barand, you have your hands raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify related to the clubs discussion we were having a minute earlier. The chess club, for instance, would not necessarily have an official event or competition, perhaps, in the sense that you're talking about. or would specifically be excluded under the term meetings, perhaps, in that last sentence of limits to participation. So with regard to the discussion you're having with administration as well, what is the practical implication of all of these clubs being governed by the policy if they are really only meeting on a regular basis and there isn't a more significant event?
And I think
Does
it's,
that make sense?
yeah, thank you for raising that. I think it's important to have a broad umbrella, because then you're not missing any. So if it just so happens that your chess club doesn't have a competition right now, that's fine, but that still gives you the ability, if you're in activity, if you do decide to participate in a club, like those entry fees are covered by the district. I think it gives them some benefits if they need to utilize them, and then consequences if they're not following this policy will also be implemented if something comes up that's applicable.
But as a practical matter, I guess, those grade checks would perhaps only need to happen in the event that the chess club is going to a competition. Is that true?
No,
Or would
I
the
think
grade
that those
checks-
should happen in order to remain. So here's the thing. I think the more monitoring we have on our students, like in the best possible way. Like I want someone checking the grades of our student. I want that to happen whether our students are in athletics and activities or not. I want concerned adults to be concerned about your well-being, academically, socially, etc. So I don't see that as a punitive thing. Now, I do get that that takes work to do, because if I'm in the chess club and I'm failing math, I want someone to ask me about that. I want there to be some support to remedy that, and I think this may help us get at that. But I really want to be sensitive to Mr. Dupuy's point that's like, hey, I'm one athletics and activities director, and even saying me or a designee, like that could turn into a lot really fast. And so I think it's appropriate that if we're going to have someone that serves as an advisor, which gives you activity status, if I've got 10 kids in my activity as the advisor, I don't think it's unreasonable to take on those responsibilities, so those increments of 5, 10, 15 aren't just thrown at the feet of the athletics and the activities director. I think that's part of being responsible for an activity. Mr. Dupuy, do you see that differently?
No, again, there's just so much ebb and flow in between our clubs, right?
Yeah.
And so this student might not come to me halfway through the year. Yep, I want to join your club. Yep, you joined my club, right? And now it's not like the WIA in athletics where there's a clear-cut schedule and things, laid out. If we have 25 to 50 clubs or activities or whatever we're calling them, each one of those are going to have to be outlined on type 1, type 2, and type 3 violations and what the consequences are based off that club, because they all don't fit in that box like athletics do, if that makes sense, right? If I'm in a play and I get a code violation, for example, my last district I was in, right, depending if it was a week before that play, if you were the lead, you could still participate in opening night, but then you had to choose between Saturday or Sunday because you were so close to that opening night. If it was prior to that, then it would automatically be opening night. So there's just a ton of variables when it comes to these things, because there's not a clear-cut schedule or practice time or events for each activity. They're all different.
So go ahead.
I think maybe one thing that would help in this whole process is if we use the word board-approved activity, because then I think what we have the opportunity is when Mr. Dupre and I get a list of the clubs and organizations that might fall under this, then it may be that there are ones that naturally fit under this, which would be board approved. There might be others that are, that are groups of individuals getting together, but they wouldn't necessarily be a board approved activity. It doesn't mean there's not a group of kids meeting, but it may not be a board approved activity. And we just have to make it a practice that annually the board would approve the activities so there'd be a list of board-approved activities each year.
So are you saying that that list would potentially include, because right now, it's my understanding, the only thing we approved is if there's a fundraising component. So are you saying that the next time the board approves activities or a slate of activities, that those include those that have a fundraising component and those that don't?
Right, what I would do is, what I'm thinking of is that we'll work on a list of basically every activity that has an advisor. It may be that after looking at that list, there's a determination of, these types of activities will fall under board-approved, but these other ones, we may not fit under, the board may consider, those don't need to be a board-approved activity. Those can exist, but we're not looking that we're approving them. But I think until we get a list and take a look at how many there are, but if it's board-approved and we make it as a regular habit that at the beginning of each year, the board's presented with a slate of activities that we're asking you to be board-approved activities, then, it makes it a lot cleaner.
Yeah, so my only pushback on that is the committee has unanimously said that if you're an organization, if you're a collection of students and you have an advisor, then that's an activity. So whether or not, I don't understand why we would have, if that is okay for you to meet and have an advisor, why that, because something is either approved by the board or it's not. So I don't see the differentiation there. If you have an advisor, you're an activity, and that would fall under this policy. Yes, go ahead.
At the Business, Finance, and Operations Committee, last night, we did look at a list of student activity summaries for the 22-23 school year, which listed quite a few at the high school, but the only ones after that were 3 of them at McNeil. And so there were no other approved clubs or activities board approved in the district. And there are a lot more than that take place.
But it's my understanding is because that has a fundraising component, that's
Right.
why it came to the business committee.
Right.
But if you have and I hate being repetitive.
Right.
But we've all unanimously said, if you have an advisor, you're an activity.
Correct.
All right. Anything else for policy 377?
A couple things going back as we've been talking about activities and clubs, the very first sentence in the first paragraph, participation in interscholastic activities, athletics, activities and clubs enhances engagement. I think we need to,
Yeah, we discussed that before we came up with the sentence before that we would include athletics and activities enhances engagement.
and the same thing in the third paragraph.
Yep, athletics and Ms. Shope, can you do a sweep through of the policy and anywhere it says athletics it's like peanut butter and jelly. Sorry to anyone who has nut allergies. But they go hand in hand. So athletics and activities. Thank you for catching that, Board Member Schneider.
And the other spot would be in that third paragraph, the last sentence, the Director of Athletics and Activities will provide guidelines for coaches and advisors.
Absolutely.
Because we have the activities handbook. So that would be the guidelines that could be given to advisors.
Perfect. Ms. Shope, did you see where that needed to be added in the third paragraph?
Third paragraph, it would be the second from last sentence that starts with activities will provide guidelines for coaches and advisors.
Thank you. All right, so we have reviewed 377 and 377 Rule 1. As we prepare to look at 377 Rule 2,
Point of clarification. I have
Please.
one other really quick question.
Yep.
So it sounded to me like Board Member Schneider was trying to add athletics and activities or clubs in that first sentence.
Athletics and activities.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
No problem. All right. So as we approach policy 377, Rule 2, I just want us to keep in mind that that corresponds to items 6, 7, 15, and 16A on our to-do list, and that should wrap everything up. But remember, we have that new item of 3E, just to do a final sweep of that list to make sure we captured everything. All right. So let's just take this by number. instead of by page, because 377 Rule 2 has the most edits. So for number 1, personal conduct of students, is there anything, committee member Schneider, questions, concerns, et cetera, just on number 1?
I think the edits we already have in place take care of that.
Okay. Board Member Anderson, same question.
I have no edits for that first section.
Okay, so the note that I have to myself actually corresponds with 16A on our to-do list. And the question is there so this is referring to intermediate schools, athletics and activities, is there a code meeting? And the response, if you don't have the document open, thank you, Mr. Dupuy, for including this. Not currently, would like to move this in the future with all 4 intermediate schools on the same page as it pertains to intermediate athletics, which I think is great. My question is, do you have any objection to intermediate students who participate in athletics or activities? I get how it may not be a requirement now because of capacity, but do you have any problem with them attending the high school code meeting? And the reason I'm asking is because the rules that govern intermediate are so similar to the high school. In fact, it was that intentional patterning. If they want to come and just get additional explanation, because intermediates still need to sign off on that same document. Do you have any objection to them participating in the athletic meeting at the high school?
No, I don't have any objection. Their seasons don't necessarily align with the high school seasons, so that would be the only thing. But yeah, anybody can come.
Okay. Ms. Shope, could you put a pin in that and remind us to add that, if it's not already there, I don't remember off the top of my head, to Rule 3, just to make sure that it's clear in policy. It's not a requirement, but you have that option. All right. Number 2, Board Member Schneider, any adjustments, any questions just to number 2?
I do not see any at this point.
Okay. Board Member Anderson, same question, and just for number 2, eligibility rules.
So my one question is for Mr. Dupuy. For the things that you added, do you see this being like sustainable on your side, making it so that your workload doesn't become too much with the grade check intervals and everything else?
Yeah, so I don't know, Michelle, if you pushed, I revised some things and I took out this long intervention piece on 5, but I think Amy's or Ms. Levy's talking about number 2.
Yeah,
just
we're just on
maintain
number 2
eligibility,
right now.
right? So I can address that, Spencer, when we get to 5. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I'm just talking about the grade checks and interventions because, like, it's talking about you having meetings with students and teachers and.
So again, I think that goes into our code book and not necessarily policy. When I was talking to administration, obviously that's long and lengthy. We keep in what we had and was proposed, but then we put these things are followed through, throughout. And I guess we'll have to, make adjustments or see, depending on what the committee decides.
Now, Mr. Dupuy, just for clarification, I actually didn't have that question because the way it was presented to us in the edits, and I'm just talking about number 2, but number 2, Roman numeral 5, 1 through 4, those are all original edits from you. It says AD recommendation.
Yep.
So if you're recommending it, my assumption is that that's what you want to do. You want it in there, correct?
So that was the recommendation, and then meeting with administration and coaches and everybody else, they thought that that was too wordy for policy, that should be in our handbook. Not
So just to
necessarily
give some
policy.
kind, and I appreciate
Because,
that.
I'm
go ahead.
sorry, that might be attainable for me, but when my tenure's done, that might not be attainable for the next person, or they might have a different way of going about grade checks and interventions.
So a couple things. One, I think that this committee does make an intentional effort to be as efficient with our verbiage as possible. But I really like that the process is outlined, and I think that's appropriate for policy. And just to provide context, if it's something that this language can show up in more than one place. So it's in the handbook and it's in policy, and we've kind of done that, and it has worked well. What I would say, and I appreciate you bringing that up, that like this is how I want to do it. I think if it's a good idea, then that becomes our standard. And so anyone else who comes into that seat, this is our district standard, not this is an individual's preference. So one, I appreciate the work that you put into this. I love this leaves very little for question about who does what when. And I like that. I like for policy to be clear. So I'm actually fine with that. And I am hopeful that this becomes our standard. So if someone else is ever in that seat, they understand that this is our standard.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously from an athletic realm, it's attainable, but when you throw in hundreds of students that are participating in activities as well, I'm not sure if that's attainable. From my lens, to look at, I think right now we have, I don't know, I don't know the number offhand, but you throw in 25 activities, and hopefully, we're looking at 700 to 1,000 plus kids participating in athletics and activities throughout the year. That's not going to be attainable for me. And I know we have designee on there, but then who is following through with that? Is that advisor, paid or non-paid advisor? And what is that expectation? And then I guess the other thing is the communication with that, how are they following through with those meetings and implementations, because of their workload throughout the day. So those would be my only kind of concerns when we throw everything into that gamut. Right now we have, it's attainable from an athletic standpoint from my lens, I think.
So here's my frustration, is that the policy is athletics and activities. And it was my impression that that's why we were pausing. That's why administration and athletics and activities director was going to come back with understanding that the policy is for athletics and activities. So it's a little concerning that it doesn't seem like that was thought of with the edits.
No, I think it was. I would be curious to see kind of what has been done in the past and outlined in the past of how that was taken into consideration for both athletics and activities. I do think that our activities need to be held to a high standard as well as grade checks and follow through on those types of things. But again, I think it's a group of those necessarily when it falls under the code in the code book of those that are competing or participating, not those that are just meeting. I think there could be other verbiage or another way to go about those, because how do I code somebody if they're not competing?
Because they're in an activity.
So you're saying that we just couldn't, so their code would be you couldn't go to their meeting?
So here's the thing. I don't know a different way to say it. The policy is for athletic and activities, and it was my understanding, again, the administration is going to work to come up with edits. And it sounds like you guys have, you all, please forgive me if I'm understanding this incorrectly, that the recommendations are solid for athletics, but maybe not for athletics and activities, but that was the task.
And I readjusted what I turned in. I don't know if that was turned to you guys, but I took that out,
You took what out?
that verbiage. Was that not shared?
Of
There-
of activities?
There's only two things that we talked about for the final thing. Was that not shared?
Ms. Shope, could you put the policy up that was shared with the committee that we're reviewing? And maybe hopefully that'll help clear things up.
Right, that was my previous recommendation, and then my task was to go back and meet with all stakeholders,
Yep.
and then I did, and then I submitted something else.
So let's just put a pin in that, because it's my understanding that what we're looking at now to review is whatever the final thing you submitted was.
And that verbiage was not on that for that reason.
What verbiage? The detailed list?
Yes,
See, that's what okay. So here is my concern, and maybe other committee members. That's what we have to work with, because that was what was submitted to the board as your recommendations for what the policy should be. So if you're saying what we've spent time looking at is not your current recommendation, then that's a problem.
I was told that I need my final recommendation in by 9/27, and I sent it 9/26.
Okay. So we got final after the attorney looked at it, I want to say Monday. Is that accurate, Ms. Shope?
Yes, but what I did was I took what Mr. Dupuis sent to me,
On 9/26?
and I
Okay.
incorporated it into what we already had. So if I overlooked that he omitted something, that would be on me, because I would have needed to cross it out. And I can honestly tell you, at this moment of this hour, I don't know if his copy did not have that information on it. So I'm
Okay.
pulling up the copy you're looking at tonight
Yep.
for right now.
So let me just pause. Everybody's fine, and we're all in this together. So Ms. Shope, if you could, for example, looks like you're doing it, please pull up policy 377, rule 2. And Mr. Dupuis, I don't know if you're in board docs, if it's easier for you to pull that up so you have it on your screen, because I get looking at that large screen can be kind of challenging, and I'm not sure if you're logged into the meeting. But for example, could we go to number 2? Because what I don't want to do is continue to edit the policy if it's not an accurate reflection of what our administration is recommending to us, because I don't want to have to go back and redo this. So, Mr. Dupuis, if you are able to go in board docs to look at what we have been working off of,
Yep.
or even physically come to this screen, and if we can just do kind of a check-in just for number 2. Are those your current recommendations?
No, the two recommendations were strike, have a GPA of 2.0 or higher from the previous term. Recommendation, no GPA requirement. However, one must have passed all their classes from previous term.
We have that.
Yep. Then the second was striking the fall exception rule all the way down to,
Wait, hold on. Could we just stick
Yep.
with number 2? So for number 2, we have Roman numeral 3, where your recommendation is to strike, have a GPA of 2.0 or higher from the previous term.
Yep.
And then your current recommendation is be passing all classes from previous term. And then for Roman numeral 4, your recommendation is to omit that completely and then create Roman numeral 5, which would become 4, which is the grade check / interventions that are outlined.
Nope, in the document that I sent on 26, it left in the Director of Athletics and Activities will support coaches and students by tracking those students with Fs at the grading terms and midterms. The district will use a data tracking method to follow progress.
Okay.
And then we had talked about putting this then into how I would be tracking.
Okay, so let's do this. And I'm open to receiving feedback from other committee members. I don't want to proceed if we're not looking at the same version of the policy. So what I thought was happening tonight is that the administration was coming with their input for us to do a final review of and then potentially pass that on to the full board. That cannot happen if we're not all looking at the most current revisions. So what I would recommend we do is that we pause, that the administration work with the team to make sure at our November meeting. So our November meeting will basically be this meeting without the public comment because we held that space open. And I just need for the administration to commit that whatever is sent to the board to review, it's your actual recommendations and not something else.
And that's what we did.
But that's not what made it to us.
Which is on me.
The answer is yes. And what the other thing that we'll bring to that, which we discussed tonight, is Mr. Dupre and I will bring a list of what currently would be any activity that would have a advisor that's either paid or voluntary in the schools. Because right now, neither of us know how extensive that list will be, but we'll bring that list so that it can serve as a point of reference when we talk about activities. We will at least know what currently exists in the schools that have either a voluntary or paid advisor so that it's a source of information.
Okay, so this is what I'm recommending. I'm recommending that we postpone number 3, that we pick that up at our next policy meeting, which will be Wednesday, November 2nd. And the thing that we will add to the agenda, which is what we added here, the 3E. Ms. Schultz, please put on the agenda that we will review our to-do list that we created tonight, because the item that you just referenced is captured on that. Do any other committee members, do you feel we should be moving in a different direction? Please go ahead and unmute.
No, I agree with moving in that direction. Just one thing as we look at number 2, item 5, the grade checks and interventions only list basically those involved in athletics, and it doesn't say the process for activities. And so they may vary a little bit. So just to update that, so whatever's going then into the activities handbook is directed towards activities.
All right.
Which could include who the designee is, which may be the advisor or whoever is going to do the grade checks.
And I would be in favor of keeping designee broad and just trust that our athletics and activity, because I don't want to put you in a box, or it can only be you and you know what I mean? And just trust that you're going to find an appropriate person to execute that task. All right. Is there a motion to postpone item 3 on our policy until our November 2nd policy meeting, with the understanding that the administration will make sure that the board receives for review current recommendations?
So
So
moved.
moved. Or second?
All right, there is a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously, and that brings us to number 4, meeting closing. Our next meeting date will be Wednesday, November 2nd, in the boardroom at 5:30. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone.